Welcome. Come on in to Sunday School Teachings. My name is Imelda Trevino Ingman, and today we journey through the book of Job. It tells the story about a man named Job, a man of God. It is a gripping drama of riches to rags and to riches, a theological study about suffering and divine sovereignty, a picture of faith that endures. As you read Job, analyze your life and check your foundation. May you be able to say that when all is gone but God, He is enough. The story is set in the land of Uz, probably located northeast of Palestine near the desert land between Damascus and the Euphrates River. The book of Job is the first, or thought to be the first, of the poetic books in the Hebrew Bible. Some believe it is the first book of the Bible to be written. It also gives us insight into the work of Satan. In Ezekiel 14:14 and 20, and James 5:11, mention Job as a historical figure. Let's journey together to learn more. The book of Job is the 18th book of the Bible and has 42 chapters. The author is unknown, but possibly Job himself. And some have suggested Moses, Solomon, and Elihu. The purpose of Job is to demonstrate God's sovereignty and the meaning of true faith, and to address the question, why do the righteous suffer? The book of Job can be broken up into four major sections. First, the first two chapters, documenting Job is tested. The next large section is chapters 3 through 31. The three friends break their silence and answer Job's question. Then chapters 32 through 37, a young man answers Job. And finally, God answers Job and Job is restored. Let's journey together. Again, the book of Job introduces a man named Job who was of great wealth. He was an honorable man who had done right by God. Job had 10 children and he worked really hard to support them. He always prayed for forgiveness for his children because he knew that they were selfish and full of sin. He knew that his wealth, abundance of land, and huge amounts of cattle had given his children a lavish lifestyle. They had become accustomed to large feasts and parties, and was a life they enjoyed but did not appreciate. Unbeknown to Job, in heaven, God had a conversation with Satan and his faithful ways. God boasted of how righteous Job was, and Satan told God that Job was only faithful because his life was full of wealth and splendor. So Satan challenged God and asked him to allow him to destroy the many parts of Job's life for good. Satan suggested that Job would sin during this time and curse God for his life becoming one of the loneliest and full of grief lives. God had faith in Job, so he allowed Satan to cause great destruction and strife in Job's life. After the conversation with God, Satan began to destroy Job's life. He began by ruining his land, killing all his cattle, and taking away all of Job's riches. Satan then made sure that all of Job's children were killed. This left his wife and a few of his workers left to pick up the pieces. Although Job was distraught and full of grief, he did not lose faith. During this time of mourning, Job did not commit any act of sin. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." And Job responded, "You speak as a foolish woman speaks. Should we accept only good from God and not adversity?" Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And as you read through the book of Job, you'll notice that Job's wife, beyond at this point, is never mentioned again. So back to Job. Job turned to God for strength and remained devoted to him. Job passed the initial test that was given to him because he understood that God can both give and take away. Now, Job had 3 friends that came to visit him, named Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They came to visit him during his moment of grieving. At first, they silently grieved with Job. They grieved with him for 7 days and 7 nights. They clothed themselves in sackcloth and sat in ashes like Job. Now let's journey and learn more about the 3 friends. So when they began to talk, and after the silence was broken, they began to talk and speculate about the reasons for Job's tragedies. They told him that sin had caused his suffering, and they told him to confess his sins and turn back to God, but Job maintained his innocence. So this is all done in 3 speeches. In the first speech, Job curses the day that he was born, insisting that life under the conditions that he must bear is not worthwhile, because he is certain of not any wrongdoing. He sees no justice in the way he must suffer. To this speech, Eliphaz replies that righteous people do not suffer, only the wicked are tormented in this fashion. For Job to declare himself innocent is to charge God with injustice. Add that a man should be more just than God is unreasonable. Eliphaz argues that in God's insight, no human being is righteous. All humans have sinned, and any suffering they must endure is a just punishment for their transgressions. Bildad adds his support to what Eliphaz says by insisting that God does not distort justice, neither does ever act unrighteous. Zophar goes even further in his accusations against Job. Job is not being punished in as much as he deserves, for God is both just and merciful. And mercy always means treating people better than a person deserves. To these speeches, Job makes an effective reply. He challenges the accusers to point out any evil deeds that he has committed. If he has failed simply because he is mortal, it is not his fault, for he was created that way. His conduct has been as good as that of his accusers. In the first round of speeches, a cycle is repeated with Job again making a reply for each friend's speech. In the third cycle of speeches, only Eliphaz and Bildad speak. In Job's final reply in protest of innocence, he makes a masterful defense of his own position. At the conclusion of this, we are told the words of Job are ended. Then we come to a bystander. A young bystander named Elihu rebukes the 3 friends for being unable to give Job a reasonable answer for why he was suffering. But he gives only a partial response to Job's question. He failed to convince Job. It prepared the way for God to speak. So let's journey and learn about God speaking. Suddenly, God appeared out of a whirlwind to criticize Job for pretending in the course of his statement to know things only God could know. Job repents of his arrogance, and God rewards him with a new family and an estate twice as large as the one taken from him. At God's suggestion, Job offers sacrifices to redeem his three friends who urged so badly in their counsel to him. You know that Job lived 140 years after this and saw his children and their children to the fourth generation. Then Job died old and full of days. Now, there are several themes that we can see throughout the book of Job. First, suffering, Satan's attack, God's goodness, pride, and trusting God. Let's explore each one of these individually. Suffering, through no fault of his own, Job lost his wealth, children, and health. Even his friends were convinced that Job had brought the suffering upon himself. For Job, perhaps the greatest trial was not the pain or the loss, but being unable to understand why God was allowing him to suffer. Suffering can be a penalty for sin, but it isn't always. And prosperity isn't always a reward for being good. Those who love God are not exempt from trouble, although we may not be able to understand fully the reasons for the pain we experience. Let's take a look at Satan's attack. Satan attempted to drive a wedge between God and Job by getting Job to believe that God's governing of the world was not just and good. Satan had to ask God for permission to take Job's wealth, children, and health away. We must learn to recognize, but not fear, Satan's attack, because Satan cannot exceed the limits that God has set. Don't let any experience drive a wedge between you and God. Although you can control how Satan may attack, you can always choose how you will respond when it happens. We see God's goodness. God is all wise and all powerful. His will is perfect. Yet he does not always act in ways that we understand. Job's suffering didn't make sense because everyone believed good people were supposed to prosper. When Job was at the point of despair, God spoke to him, showing him his great power and wisdom. Although God is always present, at times he may seem far away. This may cause us to feel alone and to doubt his care for us. But we should serve God for who he is, not how we feel. He is never insensitive to our suffering. God is enough, and we must hold on to him. Then we see pride as one of the themes. Job's friends were certain that they were correct in their judgment of him. God rebuked them for his pride and arrogance. Human wisdom is always partial and temporary, so undue pride in our own conclusions is sinful. We also must be careful not to judge others who are suffering, because this can likewise be the sin of pride. We must be cautious in maintaining the certainty of our own conclusions about how God treats us. When we congratulate ourselves for being right, we become proud. We also see the theme in trusting God. God alone knew the purpose behind Job's suffering, yet never explained it to Job. Despite this, Job never gave up on God. Even during suffering, he never places his hope in his experience, his wisdom, his friends, or his wealth. Job focused on God and God alone. Job showed the kind of trust we are to have. When everything is stripped away, we are to recognize that God is all we ever really had. We should not demand that God explain everything. God gives us himself, but not all the details of his plan. We must remember that this life, with all its pain, is not our final destiny. So, beloved brothers and sisters, as you journey through the book of Job, emulate Job and decide to trust God no matter what happens. In the book of Job, one of my favorite scriptures is found in chapter 2, verse 3. Then the Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete in integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil, and he has maintained his integrity even though you urged him without cause." Now, as you journey as a family through the book of Job, there are the first there are biblical or classical Bible stories here dealing with Satan concerning Job, which is the first two chapters, and Yahweh, which is God's truth and restoration of Job, found in chapter 42. I encourage you to journey together through the book of Job. And as you do, be blessed, beloved brothers and sisters. And thank you for journeying with me today through the book of Job. Until next time, be blessed.